Dad called me a worthless failure. So I sold the $900,000 house he was living in and left him alone. My name is Claire and I am 22 years old. I always knew my dad didn't believe in me. He made that perfectly clear from the moment I chose a different path than he wanted. He said I was wasting my time with writing, that dreams don't pay bills, and that I'd end up working retail until I was 50. He used to laugh when I told him I wanted to be an author, like it was some embarrassing joke. And every time he laughed, a small piece of me folded up and tried to disappear. But I kept going. Quietly. Writing late into the night when the house was dark. Working part-time jobs to survive. Submitting short stories to magazines, most of which ignored me. But I never gave up. Not even when he told me I was a burden. Not even when he said I'd never be worth anything. I swallowed those words like poison and kept moving forward. We lived in a large house in a quiet suburb, one my grandparents had bought decades ago. It had 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and enough yard for my dad's rusting pickup truck collection. It had also been left to me in my grandmother's will. That part always surprised people. They assumed Dad was the rightful heir, but Grandma knew what kind of man he was. She saw how he treated me, how he dismissed my dreams, how he ridiculed every success I tried to share with him. So she left the house to me, not him. But I never rubbed that in his face. After she passed, I let him stay. He was my dad, after all. I couldn't throw him out. Even when he turned my old room into a storage closet and made me sleep in the basement. Even when he said it was only fair since I wasn't pulling my weight. I got my first book deal when I was 24. It wasn't big. Just enough to let me quit my barista job and write full-time for a year. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally see me differently. I printed the contract and brought it to the kitchen. He didn't look up from his newspaper. When I told him how much the advance was, he grunted and said, "Pocket change." I remember standing there with the papers in my hands, blinking away tears. That night, he told one of his drinking buddies that I was still freeloading and wasting space. That buddy repeated it to someone else, and soon the whole neighborhood seemed to know that I was, in my father's words, a parasite with a laptop. But I didn't leave. Not yet. I kept writing. And over time, things started to shift. My first book got picked up by a book club. Then a YouTuber with 2 million followers made a review video. Then a publisher reached out and offered me a 2-book deal. Suddenly, I wasn't just surviving. I was earning. I paid off my student loans. I bought my own car. And I started thinking seriously about moving out. I figured maybe, if I had my own space, our relationship would heal. But I was wrong. The better I did, the worse he treated me. He told me success was making me arrogant. He said I was acting like I was better than him. He said the only reason I had anything was because of the house, his house, he called it, conveniently forgetting whose name was on the deed. One morning, after I signed a movie rights deal, I tried to tell him the news. He was watching a football game and told me to shut up. Said he didn't care about those fantasy books for nerds. Then, right in front of me, he said the words that finally cracked something open inside me, "You'll always be a worthless failure." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him. Something in my chest felt like it had been lit on fire, but not the kind that makes you cry. The kind that makes you plan. I walked out of the living room without a word, went down to the basement, and started pulling out every document I had about the house. The will. The deed. The tax records. I read them all carefully. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a real estate agent. The second was to a lawyer. And the third was to a storage unit company. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly. I boxed up my things at night. I photographed the house during the day. I let the real estate agent tour the place while Dad was out at his weekly poker night. I cleaned up the basement, patched holes in the drywall, and repainted the porch. The agent said the market was hot and the house could sell fast, especially with some of the renovations I'd done. I asked her not to put a sign up in the yard just yet. I didn't want him to know until it was too late. I sold the house in 6 days. It went for just over $900,000, cash offer, no contingencies. I signed the paperwork with shaking hands. Not from guilt, but from relief. I had tried for so long to make peace. To earn his love. To prove I wasn't a failure. But I finally realized that no amount of success would ever be enough for him. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't my fault. I didn't tell him the sale was finalized until the morning the movers arrived. He was in the garage, fixing something on one of his junk trucks. I handed him the envelope with the final documents. He opened it, brows furrowed, and then his face went red. He screamed. I let him. He called me names I won't repeat. He said I was heartless, ungrateful, evil. He said Grandma would be ashamed. I told him she would be proud. He tried to rip the papers in half, but it didn't matter. The sale was done. The new owners were arriving the next morning. He had 72 hours to vacate. I spent that night in a hotel. Slept like a baby for the first time in years. When I came back the next morning to collect the last of my things, the house was eerily quiet. He was gone. So was most of his stuff. He left behind a few broken tools and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. And on the kitchen table, he'd scrawled one last note on the back of a receipt. "You're dead to me." I read it once. Then I burned it in the sink. That should have been the end of it. That's what I thought. But the universe wasn't done twisting the knife just yet. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call that would drag everything back to the surface and shake loose secrets I never imagined were hiding in my family's walls. It was a woman's voice on the other end, tight and polite. She asked if I was the previous owner of the property at that address. I said yes. She asked if I had done any recent renovations. I told her I had fixed up the basement and porch. Then she paused. She said something had been found behind one of the basement walls, something that had made the new homeowners very concerned. I asked her what it was, already feeling my stomach tighten. She said it was a small, locked metal box embedded between the studs. And inside it was a collection of old letters, photos, and a ledger. The ledger, she said, appeared to be connected to my grandfather, who I barely remembered. And according to what they could tell, it might involve serious financial crimes. Tax fraud. Offshore accounts. Embezzlement. I laughed. At first I thought it was a mistake. Some kind of mix-up. But the woman offered to send me photos. She said the homeowners were reporting it to the authorities but thought I might want to see them before things got messy. I agreed. When the pictures came through an hour later, I sat staring at them for 10 full minutes. There, in my grandfather's handwriting, were records of bank transfers, hidden trusts, and numbered accounts. And scrawled across the last page was a name I hadn't seen in years. My father's. Not just listed. Signed. Multiple times. It wasn't over. Not even close. I stared at the photos on my phone, barely breathing. Each image peeled back a layer of the man I thought I knew. The ledger was real. So were the foreign accounts, the alias signatures, and the list of transactions that went back decades. My grandfather had been involved in something big, bigger than I'd ever imagined. And my dad? He wasn't just a cruel, bitter man clinging to control. He was involved. Deeply. For a long time I sat motionless in my tiny apartment, trying to understand what this meant. Why had none of this come out when Grandma died? Why did she leave me the house if it held secrets like this? Was it her way of passing me a key to the truth? I called the woman back, her name was Laura, and she confirmed that local police had been contacted. She also mentioned that 2 investigators were coming to inspect the documents later that week. She said something else, too. Something that flipped everything sideways. A man had shown up at the house 2 nights earlier, trying to talk to the new homeowners. He'd claimed he'd forgotten something in the basement. They turned him away. But the way he acted, the desperation, the insistence, made them suspicious. Laura sent me the security footage. It was my dad. Disheveled, frantic, pacing on the porch like a man about to lose everything. He'd come back. For the box. The walls around me felt like they were closing in. I hadn't heard from him since the day I sold the house. I assumed he'd vanished, gone off to sulk in some cheap motel or crashed on a friend's couch. But this was something else. He was scared. Not just angry, terrified. Whatever was in that ledger wasn't just about my grandfather. It was a trail that led to him. And he thought he could bury it before anyone else saw. I started digging. I had access to more than he realized. My book deals had connected me with journalists, researchers, editors. I reached out to a woman named Sky, an investigative reporter I'd once helped with a fictionalized version of a financial crime story. I told her what I found, sent the images, and asked if she could help me trace the names in the ledger. She replied within minutes. Already on it. Over the next few days, more pieces fell into place. Offshore accounts linked to shell companies. One of them matched an address my father used as a P.O. box in the late 90s. The money trail led through Panama, Belize, and Luxembourg. And the amounts, millions. It wasn't just fraud. It was a legacy of criminal laundering disguised as family business. The same family business my dad always said collapsed due to bad investments. But that wasn't the worst part. Sky sent me a message with 2 old newspaper clippings. One from 1987, the other from 1991. Both mentioned a construction firm that had misallocated pension funds. My grandfather's company. Dozens of employees lost their retirements. Lawsuits were settled quietly, and someone in the article was referred to only as the anonymous junior partner. In the margins of the ledger, that same firm was listed again. Along with dates. Dates that overlapped with my father's apprenticeship there. My hand shook as I clicked through the files. And then, in one blurry scanned image, I saw something that froze my blood. A check, handwritten, signed by my dad. The memo read, "Final transfer, package secured." I didn't know what package meant. But I knew what he'd done. He helped siphon money out of his father's company, letting loyal employees go bankrupt while he built a safety net for himself in secret. All while telling me for years that we were broke. That I had to earn my keep. That dreams were for people who could afford failure. I tried to call him. He didn't answer. But the next morning, I got a letter. Hand-delivered to my apartment door. No return address, just my name in angry capital letters. Inside, a single page. The handwriting was unmistakable. You opened a door that should have stayed shut. If you think this ends well for you, think again. Don't go to the police. Don't talk to reporters. You don't know what you're dealing with. No signature. Just a final line, underlined twice, family stays loyal, or family disappears. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Even now, even when the truth was choking him, he still thought threats would work. Still thought fear was enough to keep me silent. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Sky forwarded me a new update. One of the listed aliases had recently purchased a property in another state, Oregon. Cash deal. She ran the address through a database. Surveillance confirmed it, my dad had relocated. He was trying to disappear again, to get ahead of the storm. I could have let the police handle it. I could have turned it all over and walked away. But I needed one more thing. Not revenge, closure. The kind you can't get through paperwork. So I flew to Oregon. I didn't tell Sky, didn't tell anyone. I just packed a bag and took a red-eye. The property was remote, covered in pine trees and fog. The kind of place you go when you want to be forgotten. I watched the house from the car for over an hour. He didn't come out. But then, around noon, he stepped onto the porch. He looked thinner. Older. Like a man hollowed out from the inside. And he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him. Not someone I recognized. She was young, maybe 30, holding a clipboard. She handed him papers, and they talked for a while before she left. That's when I got out of the car. He saw me instantly, and his face went gray. He didn't speak. Just stood there, like a statue cracked down the middle. I walked up the porch steps and stopped just outside arm's reach. I could hear the wind in the trees. The silence between us was heavy enough to crush steel. I told him I knew everything. The ledger. The fraud. The offshore accounts. I told him about the investigators. About the reporters. About how every signature tied back to him. I expected him to deny it, to yell, to lie. But he didn't. He just sat down in the rocking chair and put his face in his hands. He said one thing. I did it for you. I laughed. Hard. I asked him if he thought ruining lives, stealing money, and hiding it for decades was a gift. He said he always knew the family fortune would disappear unless someone protected it. That he watched his father give and give until there was nothing left, and swore he wouldn't make the same mistake. That's why he was cruel, he said. To make me strong. I told him he failed. He said I'd always hated him. That I never appreciated the sacrifices. I told him I would have rather grown up in a shack with honesty than in a mansion built on lies. He looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw fear, not of getting caught, but of being truly alone. I left the porch without another word. I reported everything to the authorities the next day. The investigators took it from there. I thought that would be the final twist. But then Sky called again. There was another name in the ledger. Buried deep. My mother's. She died when I was 12. Or so I thought. Sky said the trail didn't end there. A woman matching her name and birthdate had resurfaced years later, under a new identity. Living abroad. The implication hit me so hard I dropped my phone. If that was true. If my mother hadn't died. Why did she leave me behind? I didn't know. But I was about to find out. The idea that my mother might still be alive didn't feel real at first. It sounded like one of those late-night conspiracy theories people whisper about in Reddit threads or write thriller novels around, ironically, the kind of fiction I used to write to escape my reality. But the information Sky uncovered wasn't fiction. It was real. A match in a biometric database. A passport issued under a new name. A series of transactions from a bank in Zurich to a coastal town in Portugal. And at the center of it, a woman who had once been known as Lila Stone, my mother. When I was 12, I was told she had died in a car crash on the way home from her job at the local art gallery. There was a funeral. A closed casket. A eulogy delivered in stiff monotone by my father. I cried for weeks. Not just because she was gone, but because I never got to say goodbye. Because I never saw her body. I didn't even get to keep a photo. Dad said he threw them out because they were too painful. Now I realized the pain was never the point. The secrecy was. I asked Sky for everything she had, and then I booked another flight. This time to Portugal. I didn't know what I would do if I found her. I didn't even know if she'd speak to me. But I couldn't walk away without knowing why. Why she left. Why she let me grow up with a man like him. Why she let me believe she was dead for almost 2 decades. The town was small and picturesque, the kind of place where locals knew every corner and tourists were easy to spot. I showed a few residents the photo Sky had uncovered, a grainy shot from a bank security camera. Most people shook their heads. But one older woman, tending flowers on a windowsill, leaned forward and said, "Ah, you mean Maria." Maria. That was the name she used now. She lived in a house on the edge of the cliffs, with peeling shutters and a bright red door. I stood outside that door for 20 minutes before I had the courage to knock. When she opened it, the air was knocked right out of me. I hadn't seen her in nearly 17 years, but I knew. I knew in the shape of her eyes. The line of her jaw. The way she tilted her head, just like she used to when I would come home from school with a scraped knee and a bad mood. She froze. Her hand gripped the doorframe. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And then I said the one thing I could. "It's me." We didn't speak for the first few minutes. Just stared. Her eyes filled with tears, and mine did too, though I fought them. She stepped back and let me in, and we sat on a faded couch in a quiet room filled with sunlight and unanswered questions. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I remembered. "I thought this day would come. I just didn't know how it would feel." I didn't ask why she left. Not yet. I asked if it was real. If she'd truly faked her death. She nodded. Slowly. Carefully. Like the truth was fragile and would break if spoken too quickly. She said she left because she had no choice. That my father had threatened her, told her if she tried to take me, he'd make sure no court would grant her custody. That he had power, money, connections. That he'd make her look unstable. Dangerous. She said the night of the accident, she had planned to run. A friend helped her disappear. Her death was staged to protect her. But she couldn't take me with her. She said he watched me like a hawk, that he would have known. I wanted to scream. To shout that she should have tried harder. That she should have come back for me. But I didn't. Because when I looked into her eyes, I saw the guilt. The endless nights. The birthdays missed. The silence endured. She said she wrote me letters. Hundreds of them. Never mailed. She kept them in a box under her bed. She brought them out, trembling, and handed me the first one. Dated 2 days after she vanished. The words were smudged, some of them tear-streaked. But they were real. And in them was the voice I remembered. Gentle. Loving. Afraid. I stayed for 3 days. We talked for hours, cried, laughed. She told me everything about my father that she had once been too afraid to say. About the lies. The manipulation. The double life he led with my grandfather's stolen fortune. She hadn't known the full extent back then. But she'd known enough to know he was dangerous. I told her about selling the house. About the ledger. About what I'd uncovered. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said something that chilled me to the core. "There's a name you haven't found yet. A man he did business with. Someone powerful. If you're going to bring your father down completely, you'll need that name." She wouldn't say it out loud. She was still scared, even now. But she gave me another box, this one filled with old receipts, photos, and meeting notes. A map of a world I'd only just begun to see. I left Portugal changed. Heavier and lighter at the same time. I had my mother back, in a way. But I also had a responsibility now. Not just to myself. To every person he had hurt. Every person whose savings vanished because of the web he helped spin. Back home, the investigation into my father intensified. Federal agents had taken over. Sky's articles were front page. The story of the hidden inheritance, the forged documents, the offshore money. It all pointed to a man who built his life on theft and left wreckage in his wake. But the biggest twist came 1 week later. A storage facility in another state called me. They said my name was on the emergency contact form for a unit that hadn't been paid in 3 months. I never signed up for it. I flew out the next morning to see what was inside. It was filled with locked safes, cardboard boxes, and files dating back to the 1980s. But buried in the back was something else, a small box marked "Confidential, Client A." Inside were old ID cards, fake passports, and one photograph. My father. Standing beside a man I didn't recognize. The back of the photo had one word. Ren. I took it to the agents. One of them went pale. Ren wasn't just a name. It was a code name. For a man tied to multiple international fraud cases. One who vanished years ago. They thought he was dead. But he wasn't. He'd just changed faces. And now, it looked like my father had helped him do it. That name opened a floodgate. More connections. More dots aligned. And in the center of it all, my father, no longer just a manipulative dad, but a vital cog in a criminal network. He was arrested 2 weeks later. They found him trying to board a private plane with a fake ID and a briefcase full of cash. The trial is still pending, but the charges are staggering: fraud, conspiracy, wire transfers through dummy corporations, identity fabrication, and obstruction. He faces decades behind bars. I was asked to testify. And I will. Not out of revenge. But out of truth. Because for the first time I'm not afraid of him. I'm not the girl in the basement hoping to be seen. I'm the woman who pulled down the curtain and lit the match. And I'm not done yet. Testifying in court was not what I expected. I had imagined feeling powerful, like I was reclaiming something taken from me. But instead, I felt hollow. Not weak, just emptied out, like everything I had stored inside for years was finally laid bare in front of strangers with clipboards and suits. I sat in the witness chair while my father stared at me across the courtroom with that same cold gaze he always used when he wanted me to shrink. But I didn't. I told the truth. About the ledger, the offshore accounts, the box in the basement wall, and the photograph labeled Ren. When I mentioned the box, a quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor held it up, sealed in a transparent evidence bag. I saw his fingers twitch when he did. I realized then that this case was bigger than just financial crime. Ren wasn't just a codename in an old file. He was a missing piece of something still active, an investigation deeper and darker than I had imagined. The trial stretched on for weeks. Each day, I sat in the gallery, watching the details of my childhood reframed through evidence and testimony. My father's voice on wiretaps. Email records. Hidden cameras from the Oregon property. A secret safe room he had tried to build under the garage. It became clear that he hadn't just participated in fraud, he'd facilitated global transfers for multiple aliases, including one man whose name had been connected to political blackmail and security breaches. But while the courtroom buzzed with legal jargon and statements, I was haunted by one thing: the man in the photograph. Ren. Sky called me one evening with a voice that was more serious than usual. She said a contact in Interpol had reached out after seeing the article she'd written. The photo of Ren had triggered a response. There was a match, but it wasn't just a random criminal. It was a former intelligence officer who had gone rogue 2 decades ago. Officially, he'd been declared dead after a failed operation in Eastern Europe. But Sky's contact said the documents in the storage unit had renewed interest in the case. Suddenly, the courtroom wasn't just about stolen money. It was about espionage, betrayal, and national security. I started to realize that my father hadn't just hidden money. He had harbored ghosts. A week before the sentencing, I received a letter. It was slid under my apartment door, just like the last one. Same thick paper. Same stiff handwriting. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Just 2 sentences. You're in danger now. They know what you found. Don't trust anyone. Especially not her. It wasn't signed. But I knew the handwriting. It was my father's. For the first time in months, I felt afraid. Not of him, but of what he was pointing at. Especially not her. Who was her? My first thought was my mother. It made no sense, she'd been nothing but honest, shaken, and loving since I found her in Portugal. But then I remembered something she said. That there was a name I hadn't found. That someone powerful was connected. Why hadn't she told me outright? Why the cryptic clues and hidden boxes? Was she protecting herself? Or protecting someone else? I confronted her during a video call. Asked her if she knew who Ren really was. She froze. Looked down. Then she said something that flipped my entire world on its head. I was supposed to disappear. But I wasn't supposed to survive. I asked her what she meant, voice tight, heart pounding. She said the operation that made her vanish had more layers than just a faked death. That my father and Ren had been planning something back then. Something that involved her. She was the liability, someone who knew too much. The plan had been to silence her. But she escaped before they could finish it. It wasn't just about theft. It was about erasing witnesses. And I realized then, the secrets buried in my family weren't dormant. They were still moving. Sky confirmed it the next day. 2 agents investigating the Oregon safe house had gone missing. A third had been hospitalized under strange circumstances. The files in the safe had been scrubbed clean. Someone had broken in and removed key documents that were supposed to expose the full network. I began to get phone calls from unlisted numbers. Messages with no sound. Emails with single lines, "You're next, should have kept quiet, we're watching." I filed reports. The authorities assigned me a security detail. But nothing felt safe. Even with officers parked across the street, I felt like eyes were everywhere. The prosecutor handling my father's case advised me to go off-grid for a while. He offered witness protection. But I refused. I had one last thing to do before I disappeared. I flew back to the house. The one I had sold. I contacted the new owners and told them I needed to check something in the foundation. They agreed, still rattled from the earlier discovery. I returned to the basement, stood in the same spot where I had first found the box. But I wasn't looking for metal this time. I was looking for something else. I pressed along the wall and felt a subtle give in the drywall. A small latch. Something I had missed before. I pried it open. Inside was a slim black notebook with no labels. Its pages were filled with codes, ciphers, and coordinates. But one name kept appearing over and over again. Maria. My mother. The truth exploded in my chest like a grenade. She hadn't just run away. She had been part of it. Maybe not by choice. Maybe not fully. But she knew more than she told me. She was more than just a survivor. She had been part of the machine. And she was still hiding. I left the house shaking. Not with rage, but with resolve. I knew now that this wasn't just a family unraveling. It was a buried legacy of deception that had wrapped around my life from the start. I couldn't run. I had to finish it. I called Sky, gave her everything. The notebook. The warning. The name. She went silent for a long time. Then she said she was flying to meet me. We met 2 days later in a safe location. She had run the coordinates. One pointed to a private airstrip in Morocco. Another to a shell company headquartered in Geneva. But the third, an abandoned telecommunications bunker in rural Alaska, was the real bombshell. It was active. Had been for months. And recent surveillance showed a woman entering the site. Alone. Wearing sunglasses and a coat that was unmistakably familiar. It was my mother. She had vanished again. Just like before. And this time, she hadn't left any letters behind. I had a choice. Follow the trail. Or let the story end. I chose to follow. I wasn't done yet. Not until I knew everything. And not until I confronted the person who had saved me from one lie by hiding me in another. Flying to Alaska felt like flying into another world. I had never seen snow fall in complete silence before, or walked across so much empty land that I could hear my own breath echo back to me. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Like I was about to uncover something sacred, or cursed, buried in a place even time didn't visit. The coordinates from the notebook led me to a desolate road with no name. The only signs of life were rusted markers and tire tracks leading toward the tree line. Sky had insisted I bring someone with me. Government agents were supposedly en route, but I knew this confrontation couldn't be filtered through bureaucracy. I had to see her with my own eyes. I had to ask her why. The bunker was partially hidden by snowdrifts and overgrown shrubs. From a distance, it looked like a hill swallowed by frost. But as I got closer, the concrete structure emerged, dull and menacing against the white. A single door. No windows. No markings. I pressed my hand against the scanner pad beside the entrance, not expecting anything to happen. But it beeped. And the door opened. The air inside smelled like rust and cold metal. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit by emergency lights lining the ceiling. I walked slowly, each step echoing like a shot. My heartbeat felt like thunder in my ears. And then, at the end of the corridor, I saw her. She stood beside a control panel, facing away from me. Her posture was rigid. Alert. She turned before I spoke. Like she'd been waiting. My mother. Maria. Lila. Whatever name she was using now. Her eyes met mine and, for a moment, all the years between us collapsed. I saw the woman who once sang me to sleep. The woman who vanished, and then reappeared like a ghost. But this time, there was no warmth in her expression. Only resolve. I asked her the question that had haunted me since the notebook: why was her name in it? She looked at me for a long time before answering. Then she told me everything. She said she had once been part of something bigger than family, bigger than love. Before she met my father, she had worked as an analyst for an international security agency. Not quite CIA. Not quite Interpol. A division meant to monitor threats that governments couldn't handle officially. That was how she met Ren. Back then, he was an asset. Dangerous, brilliant, unpredictable. And my father? He was already running schemes under his father's nose. Recruiting people with access, laundering money, building a financial escape hatch for rogue operatives. She was planted to watch them both. But she made the one mistake they warned her never to make: she fell in love. Not with Ren. With my father. At first, she believed he could be changed. That his secrets were defense mechanisms, not true darkness. But as the years passed, she saw who he really was. And by the time she tried to pull away, it was too late. She had me. She was compromised. And Ren? He hadn't gone rogue, he had gone deep. He faked his death to build a new empire from the shadows. And my father was his right hand. My mother said the night she died, she wasn't just running from a man. She was running from a machine. The house, the inheritance, the way my father crushed every part of me, those weren't just signs of cruelty. They were part of a legacy. He had tried to raise me in his image. When I rebelled, he cast me out emotionally, but kept me physically close. The house wasn't security. It was surveillance. She said the notebook was a key to ending it. That she had spent the last decade tracing Ren's empire from the inside, sending intelligence to contacts one drop at a time. But when I uncovered the ledger, it moved too fast. Ren got spooked. The machine started eating itself to stay hidden. That's why agents were disappearing. Why evidence was vanishing. And now, they knew who I was. I asked her why she didn't warn me sooner. She said she couldn't. Every time she reached out, she risked blowing the operation. The moment she came out of hiding, Ren would know. But now that the bunker had been activated, the last transmission was already sent. Every name, every account, every location was now in government hands. I asked her what that meant for us. She said we had one choice: go into protection, disappear for good, or be hunted. I didn't cry. I should have. But something inside me had already closed. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't even the writer. I was the survivor of a war I didn't start, raised in the eye of a storm that pretended to be a home. But before we could leave, the door slammed shut. It echoed down the hall like the end of a drumbeat. The lights flickered. My mother grabbed my arm and shoved me toward a hidden panel near the far wall. Inside was a steel hatch. She punched in a code and told me to go. I asked her to come with me. She said she couldn't. Not yet. She was going to stall them. I didn't want to leave her. But the look in her eyes, the same one she had the night she supposedly died, told me she had already made peace with her choice. She handed me a flash drive. Said if I ever wanted to reclaim the story, to tell the world the truth, that it was all there. I went through the hatch. Crawled for nearly 10 minutes through a narrow tunnel until it opened up into snow and air and a burning sky. I didn't look back. I ran. By the time authorities reached the bunker, it was already abandoned. No sign of her. No trace of anyone. But the transmission had been received. The files decrypted. Wren's empire collapsed within weeks. Arrests in 7 countries. Accounts frozen. Buildings raided. My father was given a sentence that will outlive him. I haven't seen my mother since. But I think about her every day. About the price she paid to protect me. About the years we lost and the truths we found. About the kind of love that leaves and returns not as comfort, but as warning. The flash drive contained everything. A full memoir in her own words. Audio files. Recordings of Wren's meetings. Blueprints of his safe houses. She wasn't running anymore. She had been preparing. And me? I finally wrote the story. Not the one she wrote. Not the one my father tried to silence. My story. The one that began with a key in a lock and a father calling me a worthless failure. The book hit shelves 9 months later under a pseudonym. It didn't just tell the truth, it cracked the myth of power wide open. People called it fiction. But some knew better. Sky visits sometimes. We don't talk about the trial or the aftermath. Just quiet things. Paint colors. Books. Life. She says the world still spins. Even after the storms. Sometimes I return to that house. The one I sold. I walk past it, not stopping, but remembering. That house was never a home. It was a vault. A mask. A cage. Now, I live in a small place by the water. Windows open. Sunlight clean. The silence here is different. Not heavy. Not secretive. Just still. I wear the sapphire ring my mother gave me when we last met. I keep her letters in a drawer. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear her voice on it. Soft. Distant. Free. I'm not who I was. I'm not who they tried to make me. I'm exactly who I chose to become. And I'm still writing,